that there is always war for your mind, because the war for your mind also precludes and includes war on your perception. So that war on your perception has to be won. So you no longer can exercise any alternative perception capacity. You see? So it's not quite, does that amount for head in sand approach to life? Do I just withdraw myself and just kind of like water my garden and, no, you are aware, and as you ideally should be as aware as it is possible by being able to just hold these pinpoints to form that view so that you can hold this whilst at the very same time not being perturbed by it.
With all the madness continuing in the world, particularly in the Middle East, it feels like now so much of what's taking place is almost like an afterthought. I mean, things are just rushing, and whatever, comes into my sphere in terms of what's still transpiring there, I wonder to myself, like, what's actually happening at a more subtle level in terms of the human family, people's perceptions. Is there something beneficial taking place? Because at least for myself, I could be going about my whatever, and if I see something that's instantaneous, it's hard to reconcile. Because on one hand, seemingly people are bearing witness to this, even if they don't want to in a lot of cases. And I know for myself, when the process began, one thing in particular that I felt like I wanted to speak about was that understanding, particularly in the native populations of North America. There's this understanding of the importance of grief. And I know you just touched on it being something that, if it goes awry, so to speak, but the understanding that grief has its place, and that grief in itself is just this fierce power that, if applied properly, if it's allowed to do what it's supposed to do, naturally just changes you. And so there's nothing that somebody needs to do per se. It's just sort of what consciousness does. It permeates you and it changes your daily behavior, so to speak. I just wonder what your thoughts are, like, as everything's just, all this, it's nuts, just rushing, and at least here, I wonder what you think about.
Well, the very first time when I ventured to speak out publicly, the central message that I brought, which became like a red thread for a while, and that's not necessarily the teaching itself, it was just a message that the world is as you see it. And there is a short essay which I composed for the Dutch magazine as a They requested that to coincide with one of the science and non-duality conferences in Holland at the time, where I wanted to put this in a kind of in an encapsulated manner, that line, the world is as you see it. And now there are these conversations are catching up the highest echelons of in the sciences, interestingly enough. That old subject-object, observer-observed dynamic, where the world that we perceive, the world that we observe, as it were, is not what is being observed, is not a passive phenomena, which was, to me at least, felt very fresh or refreshing in the field that where I was speaking, which was by the time still dominated by non-duality and neo-Advaita. This was very, very strongly like that subject-object was even thrown out of the window. So what's interesting is that I don't know how far this scientific repercussions, let's say, but to me, I find it relevant in a sense of that what could be seen here as the loss or temporal loss of meaning, purpose. Because this understanding reestablishes the meaning of how reality, effectively speaking, doesn't exist as such, this phenomenological reality. In other words, nothing as it is, but always subject to how we perceive it. So the act of perception itself, of perceiving, is influencing here, influencing the observed. Of course, making that into direct example will be cross-wiring between different levels of reality, and it may just not feel too tangible enough. But if that is so, in terms of the understanding of that, quantum understanding of what is taking place and the correlation between observer and observed, and how observer influences the observed from behind the scenes. And in other words, even if observer doesn't want to influence the observed, the act of observing still does that. It's very, very Trika Shaivism for you, in motion, completely and utterly. So in other words, in terms of translating this, you could say, Sharara, that there is a continued battle going on, a continued tour de force of energetic, let's say, pullings, where some kind of reality is being woven and alternative reality is being constantly woven. So the importance of this perception here, how that potentially alters that what we observe, the observed, you see, is not at the level of so-called facts, factual reality, even though it is studied with the factual reality. After all, we get a dosage of what's happening in a compact mass of information, whatever we prefer to take. So we form our, let's say, a brief outline of so-called latest news. But what is by far more important is the status that each and every one of us exercise at any given moment in time with regard to that, what we, as it were, willingly bring forth by virtue of simply being able to perceive that finer aspect, even if that finer aspect may seem to be, what finer aspect can there be? Like when, let's say, when the genocide is going on, when there is this going on, that going on, when people dying like flies, so it's very difficult to remain in the place of that composure. Very easily we are taken out of ourselves and scattered around, destroyed because of the sheer injustice, sheer sense of hopelessness of that, the charade of it all, the what have you, what have you, what have you. But don't forget, in this very moment, there are realities, as it were, in that, let's say, like frequency-like state, vibrates imposing its possibilities on how that reality will be woven out of the sum total. So in other words, that creative tension is always there at that level of collective consciousness. So this is what I meant in some of the presentations, that there is always war for your mind, because the war for your mind also precludes and includes war on your perception. So that war on your perception has to be won. So you no longer can exercise any alternative perception capacity. You see? So it's not quite, does that amount for head in sand approach to life? Do I just withdraw myself and just kind of like water my garden and, no, you are aware, and as you ideally should be as aware as it is possible by being able to just hold these pinpoints to form that view so that you can hold this whilst at the very same time not being perturbed by it. And most importantly, being able to still perceive these finer aspects, what makes it all, as it were, filled with sanity, even if in potentiality. So in the insane world, when everything and everyone goes insane, the invitation is not to go insane and lose it completely. No, contrary to that. Okay? Everyone is insane at that level. Let me rise. Okay? Let me rise. Let me hover it. I want to breathe cooler, fresher air above all that muck. It's my job. It's my responsibility. No less will do. So, very easy to lose the line between compassion, grief, empathy, feeling for those who are suffering. And the suffering itself here is, this in itself is a leitmotif. You see? Suffering itself is a leitmotif. It reaches a certain point of when it will no longer do, it will no longer serve. And you and I will already witness that in our lifetime. Already here. It's all happening. All is happening. It may not happen the way we imagine it. It might have a lot of surprises. It may take a form that is kind of like, ooh, wow. But head to head it came now. The final frontier is still to be lived by us. Who knows, this final frontier may be precisely that where at the level of human interactions, there will be enormous waves that rise, and the waves always rise at the bottom, you see, where that what pretended to be alternative reality to be settled on is just fractured, and it has no power for it to withstand that what rises, you see. So that's what it takes to, you have to be strong in your own convictions, strong and gentle at the very same time. There has to be a fine balance between what you feed yourself with, what you feed on. But nobody said that the day and age we find ourselves right now is an easy time. No, it's not. It's not an easy time at all. And this is why the expansion of consciousness, this whole, you don't want to call it Lila, you don't want to call it Maya, you don't want to call it this play of consciousness. At some point it does reach a point of where everything seems to be perplexed to such degree where it cannot go on any longer. It's a leitmotiv, like the Mahabharata, the Bhagavad Gita. It's that. When the wrongdoing reaches catastrophical proportion, wrongdoing, that violation of Dharma, violation of the field of Dharma, is to such degree that it awakens the field itself. This is the leitmotiv. So that self-referring aspect awakens to itself, within itself, and brings the changes. You see? With it, by mere fact that it is awake to itself. That's why beings like Ramana Maharshi, when asked, what can I do for the world? The greatest service to humanity is not to be a sleeping, like a passive, covered in gray matter being. No, it's to realize the essence of who we are and simply live from that place, because then we are placed in the way we are of service. So there's no way we can somehow reconfigure that in a more preferable kind of, like, let's say, all these changes. Like, what also interesting is, the deeper the awakening, the more profound is the expansion of consciousness, the clearer one sees through the pointlessness of all the talks, of all the empty slogans and conversations, of all the political dialogues, and of all the elections and this and that. In a way, it's quite helpful to realize that no more antagonism between any alternative parties anymore. Like in England, Labour Party was in direct antagonism with Conservative Party. And that antagonism is obliterated. Labour is a new Conservative. It represents the rich, wealthy, and powerful. That's what Labour today is. In the States, the same. It doesn't matter, Republicans or Democrats. It's just to make it into a show. That's all. You will lose interest to that show. At some point, you see this as a charade. You want to laugh, you will laugh at it, You'll laugh at it, but if you start taking it seriously, it really, really, I wouldn't advise that. So this is the meaning, the true meaning of Shraddha. Not some kind of faith in some kind of second coming or something. No, it's understanding, simple and profound understanding. So don't lose that Shraddha. See it for what it is.